presenter mode. Okay, so what we went through on Wednesday night is, we spoke about the importance of connection. We spoke about where sometimes we are falling short to listen deeply and connectedly, and we fall short to express ourselves in mature ways. And the way that we show up in our interactions is really based on how we are made up when it comes to our ego state. Now, just to take the ego state a little bit, comes from a psychologist by the name of Eric Byrne. And he says that if you have to take an X-ray of the human psyche, you will find the parent, the adult, and the child within yourself. Now, there's no good, there's no bad for viewers that are joining us for the first time. We all have all of these ego states within us. The only difference is some of them are more prominent and others may not be. But let's just quickly recap on what they are all about. So the parent part of us is that part of us that is there for guiding. And we can guide in two ways. We can guide in a nurturing parent way. That is the part of us that's kind, that's caring, that is encouraging. Or we can guide in a very critical way. Where we judge, we push people to achieve, we've got high expectations, and we are very, very strict. So that is the guiding part of us, the parent ego state. The adult ego state is that part of us that is responsible for the thinking. This is the part of us that is rational, that is logical, that is facts and figures orientated. And very, very important about the adult is that the adult part of us is very unemotional. So if I, on Wednesday night, was in this adult ego state, I would have unemotionally said to everybody on the webinar that you need to please excuse me, my battery's running low, I need to plug my computer in. But you see, the problem is that we can't expect that everybody shows up in the adult. It would be amazing, but that would mean that the world would be made out of robots. We sometimes show up in feeling. We sometimes show up in the emotion. And the emotion, the child ego state, is that part of us that Zoraida just alluded to, the free child, that is the energy, the creativity, the innovation. Now, here's the important part that I did tell you on Wednesday, and I want to just see if you remember. The part of the free child is that we do not think about consequence. So you're having fun. I'm thinking to myself, I saw that image come up, the battery is low. The free child in me is saying, don't worry, you'll have enough time, carry on. The adaptive child goes into freeze and says, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And what happens is the computer dies. So the adaptive child is that part of us that is pleasing, is that part of us that just wants people to be okay. We are people pleasers. We accommodate. We're very tolerant. We're actually amazing people to have in your team, because chances are very, very good that 9 out of 10 times, if you ask us, please, can you stay late? Please, can you take more work? Our answer will be yes, because most times we say yes when in fact what we are screaming inside is no. And then the last child that we have got inside of us is the rebellious child. Now, the rebellious child is that part of us that is oppositional. It's that part of us that's defiant. I don't know how many of you have got children, but just think maybe of your teenage children or a 3-year-old. They love the word no, and they're not afraid of confrontation. So where the adaptive child would be very scared to give somebody feedback, they'd hide behind that feedback. The rebellious child will tell you exactly what it is that you need to know. But the difference between the rebellious child and the critical parent is that the critical parent is giving you that straightforward information because they want to guide you. The rebellious child is giving you that information in emotion and 10 to 1 in order to hurt you. But as I said, we have all got all of these ego states inside of us. And Zoraida referred to the egogram, and I just want to very quickly just recap the egogram for you. what we do with the egogram is that now that we know that we have got all of these ego states inside of us, what does that mean? And what we are looking for is balance. If we say that we have got the adult, the parent, the adult, and the child inside of us, then how are we balanced? Are we able to access the critical parent as easy as it is to access the nurturing parent? Because there are many stages where I need to access my critical parent, but it's very, very hard for me. I'll always be understanding rather than stepping into the position of judgment and critical parent. And what happens in the sense of well-being is that I am going to burn out, because I'm always saying, okay, it's okay. How can I help you? How can I support you? And what you're doing is you are creating dependence on yourself. The balance between the adult and the free child. Now, for many of you on this call that's never met me, my free child is high, and that's the first place that I would always go to. But I have got a very, very high adult as well. You see my free child, but the adult internally really does cross the T's and dot the I's. And maybe it is because I did work in a bank for 15 years. So maybe it was hammered in rather than, or learned behavior rather than natural. But definitely the adult and the free child, there's a good balance there. Just to be careful not to get caught up in that energy, because most often what happens is that you are the one that's sitting working late at night because you chose to have conversations during the day where you could have been productive. And then the adaptive child and the rebellious child. And yeah, you can see that I've definitely got a very, very big imbalance. My adaptive child is very, very high. And I get caught in my adaptive child so often. You know, the adaptive child wants to please. The adaptive child wants recognition, acceptance, and love. So most often what is going to happen is I'm going to get caught in that adaptiveness where I am agreeing to things that I don't want to agree to. And what I'm actually getting caught in is the rebellion, is that passive aggressiveness, is that spiral that is happening within me. Now I'm angry, but I can't tell you I'm angry. So the anger sits inside, and very often it comes out as a very unhealthy rebellious child. So this is where you would displace anger. I will come home, I'll shout at my children because I couldn't tell my boss that actually I'm upset. But this is just in essence my egogram. You know, your egograms may look very different. And I think, Zureida, you know, Dave may be a good one to also explain an egogram that looks a little bit different to what mine looks like.
Thank you, Cindy. Thanks for that recap and for sharing. Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Zureida. Nice to see you. Hi, Cindy. Hi to everyone on the webinar. What's that?
So what is it like in Canada right now?
Right now, I'm very upset because it's an overcast day and it's on one of our summer days. We have a allotted amount of summer days, and when one is overcast, it's very upsetting. So what I'm trying to do is hold back my rebellious child and stay as adult as possible.
Thank you. So Dave, I've written some points down that I would love you to analyze for me.
Sure.
And tell me how I could get this into a state of well-being. So, for example, if my critical parent was 80, my nurturing parent 20, my adult 80, my free child 20, my adaptive child 50, and my rebellious child 50. How do I get some semblance of balance and well-being there?
Wow. Okay. I mean, the first thing I'd say is you have to see a psychologist. No, I'm joking. So Zureida, I just have a question. This is not really your egogram?
Well, what do you think mine would be?
I don't think your nurturing would be so low. I definitely don't think your free child would be so low.
No, I think this is a bit of a no. It's not mine personally. It's an imbalanced one, I would think, with all due respect to anyone who who does have this exact one right now. But how would you bring some sort of semblance of balance into that for well-being?
Okay, so yeah, as you said, it's in terms of the balances that Cindy described, it's quite imbalanced. And if you look at the balances, the big imbalances lie between your parent ego states, so critical 80, nurturing 20, and between adult and free child, adult at 80 and free child at 20. The two others are evenly matched, and they a little bit lower. So I mean, firstly, just looking at this person, I think they're very strong in the space of what's right for them. And also they're quite good at what's right for other people, but we'll get to that. So very structured, very organized. They hold themselves very accountable. I would, from my adaptive child and also just from maybe a general awareness, call this probably a tough person. You know, they can be tough to deal with, but also they might come across as having quite a thick skin. So they're high in critical, high in nurturing in adult, and so they'll spend a large amount of time in the space of problem solving and fixing things in their lives and in the lives of others. But I think that the question is important. So how does this egogram play out in terms of resilience? Just the other awareness is they're low on their child ego states, so that you won't find them getting trapped in the emotions. But for me, I think something that's very, very important about this egogram is it lives in control. It loves control. The critical parent likes to be in control. The adult loves a plan. In fact, often when I'm giving this theory, I say, I joke about the adult, and I say to adults, please, can we be more can you be more spontaneous in your life? And the adult says, more spontaneity. What time should we book that for? And I say, no. It's spontaneity. But I think why it's important to mention control. When I look at this egogram, I'm going to talk about it from self and then from other. From a self perspective, the question I would ask this egogram is, what happens when you lose a sense of control? And I think the key thing in COVID at the moment is that we do feel a lot out of control. We feel very uncertain, and we don't have a plan. And even more than that, our sense of what's right and what's wrong seems quite convoluted. And so when you tend to lose a lot of this control, we have to be able to draw on the other ego states. Specifically in the egogram you gave me, the person would need to draw on nurturing parent or a little bit of free child to alleviate some of the pressure, because they're not getting what they need potentially in the critical parent and the adult. And I think the good news for a person like this is they don't need a lot of nurturing parent and free child, because it's quite low. So a little will go a long way. But the tough news is they don't feel comfortable with it. It's not their first port of call. It's their natural movement. And so if I had to give a message to this person, if they felt they were going out of control, firstly, if the high critical parent, high adult starts to look out of control, just so I start to panic. I think, wow, here's this person with all the answers, and they're seemingly out of control. But the message I would give them is, one is actually it's okay to be vulnerable with people you trust. It's okay to say, I'm battling at the moment. It's also okay to not have all the answers right now. I think we're very much in a questions economy. We don't have answers. So it's okay to not have answers. And I'd also say to them that, right now, I know you're adult and you love a plan, but that you might not have a plan at the moment. And to be okay, to try building some mechanisms around that make them feel that they have a sense of control, but maybe not in entirety. The flip side to this is what happens if they have to engage with other people. So when I look at this egogram, I think, why do you go to this person? You definitely don't go to cry on their shoulder. That's definitely not the shoulder you want to cry on, because that shoulder is going to tell you how to fix your problem. And so the real key to this is I always go to the high critical parent or adult when I want an answer. I don't go to that person when I've got an emotion sitting in me. And the message I'd say is, they might be coping, but others around them might not be coping, but they might not see this because their nurturing parent is low. We use our nurturing parent to see the world of the other. They very much focus on solutions and problems. And I want to go back to a story that Cindy shared of Sorrel and Sonette. If you remember that story, Sonette said that she was cold, and Sorrel is very much this egogram. He kept on fixing her problem for her, kept on fixing her problem. But what he was missing in that whole story was the emotional content that was sitting in Sonette's world, and he wasn't seeing it. And I think that the ironic thing about this egogram, the ironic thing is that the critical parent might often get irritated with someone who is saying, I'm emotional in this space. They might not understand it. So it's hard for them. And what I'd say is, if for themselves, a sense of slight nurturance and free child, not too far, just enough to say it's okay. And on the flip, to see people around them and just engage with them from a nurturing perspective. I could talk for hours, but I also know I have two other panelists here who have a wealth of information. So I'm going to leave it there for now.
Thank you, Dave. You mentioned a word in when you were talking now, and the word was vulnerability, which I always feel that there's so much power to be found in vulnerability. And I'd like to ask Darren this next question. Last week we spoke a lot about positive mindsets, and we spoke about gratitude. I think we use that word a lot, gratitude, if I'm not mistaken. What do we do in a situation currently where we are not okay? And I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, where's that line between being vulnerable and
be able to be in? Because if I can access my vulnerability, first and foremost, I can be honest with where I am, which provides a strong and solid base to move to having a more positive mindset and to being able to be more positive. And I think that this webinar tonight is off the back of the topic of how to speak so people can listen, how to listen so people can speak, if that's right. But I think there's vulnerability. If I'm vulnerable in communication and in conversation with you, what I'm first and foremost doing is I'm signaling to you that I'm a human being. And I'm signaling to you that I'm communicating without being critical and judgmental, by showing you that I'm vulnerable, which then invites you to access what you need to access in you, and then also allows you to be vulnerable as well. So that actually being able to be positive, but truly positive, not falsely positive with a facade, goes hand in hand with being as vulnerable as you can be.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think I didn't ask you that question properly. What I meant was not so much about vulnerability. Vulnerability, yes, but if you, for example, you try to err on the side of positivity, I guess what I'm asking is that fine line between moaning and saying I'm actually not okay. Because it's the people that often seem to have it all together. They're the ones that are never quite saying that they're not okay. And as a result, everyone else assumes that they're okay.
Yes. Absolutely. I think it goes very strongly again to, am I holding up a facade? Am I driving myself too hard? And am I not acknowledging the fullness and full range of what I'm experiencing at this point in time? I think because very often what people can do is think that if I avoid any difficult feelings that I'm feeling, or I avoid what I'm upset about, then I'm going to manage to get through it. But I think that actually starts to create obstacles. And you say a very interesting word, moaning, because moaning is very different from asking for what I need. Moaning is very different from saying I'm not okay. Moaning is almost like a low-grade chronic negativity, perhaps, that you're talking about. But what's actually would be quite useful to do is to double-click on what you're moaning about. Because often we moan and it passes by. We moan and no one listens. But if I can actually stop and go, hold on a sec, what is the complaint behind the moaning? What is the wish behind the moaning? Then I can very often free what it is and then start to move forward.
I love that, Darren. Double click on the moan. That is seriously powerful. And when you do that, you go into what we're actually speaking about here tonight is, listen so people talk, and talk so people listen. Cindy, the next one's for you, and this is one of the questions that we got. It says, I am a high adaptive child and really find it impossible to say no, but then I'll end up being resentful. I find that this is personal for me too. Any tips?
Yo, Zoraida, that is a brilliant question, and I'll tell you why I'm giggling in my mind. We went away for the weekend, and I went jogging, and I jogged past a cockatoo, but I didn't know this bird was there, and the bird said hello, and I said hello, and I jogged past again, and the bird said hello, and like now I know it's there, but I'm so adaptive. I say hello again, and 10 times around this track, and every single time I said hello to this cockatoo. So that is how adaptive I am. So just, we definitely do get stuck in that adaptiveness. And for me, the only thing that is helping me not get stuck in this adaptive child is to raise my consciousness constantly. I read an amazing book written by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he said something very profound to me. And it said, how we talk about mind over matter. And truly, whatever you think in the mind does become matter in terms of what hormones are released. And it made a profound impact on me because, after Wednesday night, I could have thought to myself, I can get stuck in my adaptiveness, which is driven by guilt, by fear, by being anxious, by beating myself up because I didn't plug in my computer. But mind becomes matter. And I chose to look at it, recognize the emotion. Yes, I do feel that adaptive emotions, but I am now conscious that I am stuck in the emotion. And how can I get myself to rationality? And really, it is for me about feeling the emotion and then responding to that emotion. And the way I chose to respond and not react to that emotion was to say, you know what, people can get amazing learning from this, because this was the true free child, adaptive child in play. So final answer is just be conscious of the traps, because as soon as you're conscious, you can make different decisions.
Thank you, Cindy. Dave, when we chatted earlier on, you spoke to me about your take on mission with Cindy. Do you mind sharing that with us? There were some really lovely insights that you had on what had happened and the way she responded to that event.
Yeah, perfect. So Zoraida, firstly, I wasn't there with Cindy and the cockatoo saying hello, but what I would say to her is next time, no. I'm going to go into the story. But I think I like what Cindy was saying, and I loved what Darren was saying about the double clicking, because I think just in terms of Cindy feeling into it would be potentially the double click that Darren was talking about. And so what we were speaking about a bit earlier was in terms of double clicking on Cindy's story. But it's interesting. Cindy told a story on the back of how to talk so someone can listen and how to listen so someone can talk. And the story was of a couple who are in bed, and she's cold, but the way she's asking for a hug, because that's what she wants, is she's talking around the bush. And so if I put that into ego state language, she has an adult request, which is give me a hug, but she's asking from a child ego state. She's asking from the adaptive ego state. And he's not listening to her from the nurturing parent, because if he did, he'd say, well, what would you like for me to make you warm? And then she would say a hug. So he just, critical parent or adult, initially adult, then critical, gives her some tea and a blanket. And normally we tell that story to show the gap that we have in listening. But then from the talk on Wednesday, Zoraida, you asked such a brilliant question, which was a question around love languages. And were they speaking each other's love language? And for me, it was a brilliant question, because I'd never looked at it from that angle. And the angle is so firstly, number one, if I just go to the simplicity of the story, if that couple came to you and said, how could we not get into this situation again? You would say to Sinette, please, when you ask don't say you're cold, rather just say, give me a hug. That's a very adult question. And Sorrel, if someone says I'm cold, ask them what they would like rather than deciding for them what they need. So that's the listening side of it. But deeper than that is what if you knew someone's love language? What if Sorrel's love language is that he wishes whatever it is? What we're talking about here is understanding the relationship in depth. That you really when you engage with someone else, not just about listening, it's also about knowing what would make that person feel better, or what would make them feel heard even. Sorrel could have got Sanette a blanket, a hug. That would have been her well-being. But he needed to see that. And so if we really understand each other's, the depth of the relationship, for me, it also helps just fast-track these interactions, these conversations. I don't know if that was exactly, I might have captured it a bit differently before. So if I've left something out, please let me know.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. I'd like to ask this question to anyone of the panel. When you speak about triggers and ego states, they terms that you deal with in your day-to-day living and career. But for the person back home that maybe isn't so aware of what it means to be triggered, or they're not, awareness is such a powerful tool, and not all of us carry a state of awareness all the time. How does one begin to know when one is triggered, and then how does one decide to make a different choice if that ego state is detrimental to a relationship or a situation? Anyone?
I'm just gonna answer the first part, the more in-depth answer. But it's fascinating you say that, because when I start my work with people, I always say I used to have amazing emotional intelligence until my daughter was born. And if there's anything that a 3-year-old can do, it is to throw you into a child ego state where you are acting and behaving like a 3-year-old. And you think to yourself, but I teach this stuff. How can this little 3-year-old have got me into such a dance with him? Awareness, that's an example of how we can get triggered. We think we're in control, and we just get pulled into this dance. And what I do is I just lock her in a room, and we leave her. I'm joking. But just maybe one quick answer is because I want to put it back to the group as well. But Zoraida, I think that's the key, is that we do have triggers, and we do get pulled into these interactions. And the one insight into that is that if you can recognize you've been pulled into the dance, and maybe that also talks to the double clicking on it. But if you can recognize that you're in a dance, what you can then do is you can step out of the dance. So when I'm acting like a 3-year-old with my 3-year-old daughter, I can recognize that actually what we've got here are 2 rebellious children. And she's created this interaction, but I've moved into it. And what I can do is I can choose another ego state that I want to be in. Specifically, what she needs, because she's 3, is a parent. And so I need to go back into the parent ego state. And now we have 2 children dancing here. So that's just the one part I'd mentioned, that actually I can recognize I'm in the wrong ego state and move to the right ego state.
Yeah, Zoraida, I would I just to kind of to pick up on what Dave is saying around triggers. I think one of the ways you really know that you're triggered is you can feel it in your body. You can feel it in your stomach. You can feel it on your skin. You can feel it. Your heart is beating. Your skin is clammy. Your mouth has gone dry, and you know that you're triggered first and foremost like that. And that's a signal to you to stop and to slow down and to take a deep breath and to try and figure out what's going on for me at this point in time that I am triggered. Because if I am triggered, if we go back to what we spoke about last time about the neuropsychology around what happens, there's a real classic distinction. And that is, if I'm triggered, it means that I'm in my old brain, I'm in my reptilian brain, and it means that I'm in fear. And it means that whatever's happened is I'm sensing danger in my environment, whatever form that danger might come in. There's a dinosaur around, and I'm in fear, self-protection mode. And if I go into self-protection mode, then once again, I'm either in fight or flight or freeze, or that very insidious one that is akin to the adaptive child and that is talking to the cockatiel that's coming away, and that is appease. Right? When I'm people pleasing and I'm appeasing, then I'm likely to be triggered and I'm needing to protect myself. Right? And at that point in time, I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. And somebody else is not likely to listen to what I have to say, because they're going to pick that up. And they're going to know that if they're sensing that I think there's danger, they're also going to think there's danger. And then the conversation is not going to flow. Communication is not going to be good. So in order for communication to really flow, then there has to be something else going on. And that's getting out of my reptilian brain, which generates oxytocin, the stress hormone in my body. Cortisol, the stress hormone in my body. But if I get into my prefrontal cortex, right, which is the human part of my brain, I feel like I have to protect myself mode. I'm no longer triggered. And in that place, I'm able to choose that I can partner with you. I can engage with you. I can trust you. There's a degree of safety in how we're communicating. And if all of those are present, then what I'm able then to do in a greater way is I'm able to choose the ego state that I'm in. One ego state is not necessarily better than the other, but what is not great is if I get triggered to the point that I get put into an ego state. But if I can go, hold on, and I choose to be in free child or adaptive child, or I choose to be in critical parent or nurturing parent at this point in time, then it becomes a very useful thing for me to be able to do. Because choosing is the opposite.
Choosing is the opposite. Say that again, Darren. Choosing is the opposite?
Choosing is the opposite of being triggered.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, I'd like you to assist with the next question. And this goes back to, I guess communication and how do you talk so someone listens, so someone can talk. How does one navigate dealing with a partner or a colleague that you really don't get along with, but you're kind of you have to make it work, either for the sake of a relationship or for the sake of being in a working team? How does one navigate that space?
You're asking the adaptive child that's going to appease and just be a chameleon to whatever the other party wants to answer that question. For me, the first thing is to recognize who it is that you're dealing with. I can't solve a problem, exactly to Dave's point, that would work in my world. I have to solve the problem that is going to work in that other person's world. And the biggest part for me in answering that question comes through listening. Because if you know that you've got the data right, and you know that you understood exactly what it is that person asked for, and you know that you're not stuck in your own values or biases, then you can start building a relationship. I think the second thing for me is to also understand that there will be a power struggle. You will, in any relationship, you will hit a power struggle, because no two people are the same. And it is about what you do in that power struggle. Are you going to find your exits? And this is where people then decide, actually, this is not working for me. I don't want to be with my husband. I'm rather going to go and play action netball just so that I don't have to be at home. Am I going to find other exits which, aren't very moral exits? Or am I going to exit and just, divorce and get out of this relationship? And I think, especially because my husband and I are so different, I can tell you when I got off the call, the first thing he said to me, the critical parent, was, "Did you not see the notification?" And I was like, "Are you actually joking? Like, what I'm needing now is comfort. What I'm needing now, you're reading me completely wrong." But because I know who he is, and because I've put the nurturing parent lens on and understanding that his guidance comes from a space of love, it's just not landed in the way that I'm gonna, that's gonna sit comfortably for me. So for me, really, that is the answer. Is you have to understand the person in that relationship. You have to accept the fact that you are going to hit the power struggle, and you can only get to a conscious working relationship if you have decided to communicate and understand both people's worlds.
Thank you for that. I like that line. His guidance comes from a place of love. That's powerful. Thank you. I want to ask either Darren or Dave this question. How does one go about trusting when it comes to communication? So we talk about listening and talking. Where does that trust come in? How do you build that trust with someone that you love or someone that you work with?
I would say trust is foundational to every single relationship that we're in. It's absolutely foundational. And I think that sometimes realizing the value of trust is such an important thing, because then if I do realize the value of trust and what I'm able to leverage with trust, then I will try to trust at all points. People like to say trust is earned, and I would say that is a very dangerous perspective. I think that trust is critical to be given, and trust is critical as a starting point in a relationship, because the second I am holding back on trusting, the other person will sense that. The other person has an inbuilt radar to pick that up, right? We have something in our prefrontal cortex called mirror neurons, where we're able to mirror what that other is going on for the other person. If I enter into a situation with trust, and what comes with that, concomitant to trust, is showing value, showing that I value you, that I respect you, you'll show that back to me, and you'll elicit that in me, and we'll then be on a sort of an upward cycle of trust. If I walk into a relationship saying I'm going to wait for trust to be earned, then I immediately short circuit that process, and we step into a space where it's more likely that we are kind of fencing with each other, checking each other out, being wary, who's going to trust first, and it's likely to generate a cycle of non-trust. With trust, I can manage so much in a relationship. With trust, we can achieve so much. We can connect, we can talk, we can have differences, we can innovate depending on what the purpose of the relationship is, be it at work or at home. So trust is foundational, and it is so important that we walk into the relationship with as much trust as possible.
I'm muted.
And this goes for strangers or not. So any relationship you come across, you go in there and you show up 100%, whether you know the person or you have a history with them or not, you show up.
Mm-hmm. Zareda, also, I want to just, if I could add to that, I'm actually glad Darren took the first part. Thank you. Because when someone says, how do you learn to trust, or how do you develop trust? When I get that question, I always hit panic. Because I don't know what the formula is. I know someone recently mentioned that Brené Brown talks about different levels of trust. She's got an acronym called Braving. I haven't been brave enough to brave that yet. But what I did want to add is yes, trust is foundational. But what I also find is you can also break trust quite easily as well. So you might have developed a strong sense of trust and over time with someone, and then you do something that's unthinking or unconscious, and you could potentially break that trust. And I'll share a quick example, and then I'll make my point. But my daughter, whenever I go to play with her and she takes me to her bedroom, I always follow her. She says, please, can you come play with me? And I follow her to go play with her. And what I've noticed she starts to do now is on the way to the bedroom, she always checks behind her to see if I'm coming. She doesn't trust that I'm going to enter that bedroom with her. And what I've realized is that on that journey to the bedroom, I tend to jump off and I go do something for myself quickly, and then I go do something else. And so now what I've realized is that she won't go and wait for me in the bedroom. She doesn't trust that I'm going to arrive, because I don't arrive. And so I'm working hard at building that trust again. But really for me is I work. So once I've built trust to someone, I also work really hard at trying not to break that trust. If someone trusts me as a good listener, some people have made that mistake. But if some people do trust me as a good listener, then I owe it to them to be a good listener, and I work really hard at not breaking that trust.
That's such a powerful observation with your daughter, because you've obviously repeated that pattern, over some time. That she now looks behind to make sure that you're still there. Lovely observation. Cindy, you work with people in corporate all the time, and I'm sure that you navigate grievances in the workspace. How do you deal with that, with the trust factor or with confrontation and altercations? What's your advice to people in that space?
So I haven't been in corporate HR for a very long time, but working and going in as Circle and Square, I can tell you that we do have models, and we do go in, and the advice that I would give is that, if there are grievances, listen. We're so used to following process, and we're so used to making sure that we're ticking all the tick boxes. But very often what happens is that we miss the true core of what really is going on, because, we almost cut the human being out of that grievance process. There's been quite a few hard ones that I've gone through. And often what people would do is they would look at the levels, and they would say, okay, so for this offense, this is the consequence, or this is the penalty. And, often there's no explanation. There's, it is what it is. But what very often happens is that sometimes people are pulled into their rebellious child, where they do react in a way that is not suited for the corporate world. And very often those people don't have an option to really put their side of the story forward. And I think that is what we really need to just try and do, is put the human back in corporate and make sure that their voices are heard.
Get the circle back, as you guys say in Circle and Square. So I'm going to ask you as a panel, the three of you obviously find it quite easy to listen, and you know what to do and what not to do. What kind of tips would you give to someone that struggles to listen, or someone that's often told that they don't listen enough, or that they react instead of responding? What are some of the tips you can give to the layman at home that doesn't listen very well? You're smiling, Darren. Do you want to kick it off?
Okay. I would say, listen. The value of it is immense. So I would say that firstly, just the notion of understanding that I think there's a mindset here that's critical. That the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our relationships. And the quality of our relationships is determined by the quality of our conversation. That's where the rubber hits the road in terms of how we relate, and our relationships is how we have conversations. Now, we often think that I've got to make my point in order for this conversation to go well. But if the other person is not listening, we're at an impasse and we'll never get anywhere. So there's that old Stephen Covey habit that says, seek first to understand before you are understood. And if you're really wanting to be heard, people want nothing more than to know that they are heard. And once they are heard, they'll be clear to know that you have heard them. So a simple thing often to do with somebody is to repeat back to them and say to them, let me understand, is this what you've said? And again, until they say yes, is this what you mean? And they'll say yes, or they'll say, no, it's not. So tell me again, what do you mean? Until they go, yes, that's what I mean. then you know you're free also to make your point at that point.
I'm muted.
Thank you, Darren. I read this lovely quote the other day that said something like, listen and see them heal. Something like that. So basically, if you want someone to heal, listen to them. I thought that was quite profound. I have a question here from an audience member that says to ask Dave, how do you get someone who is in a child state to adult?
Okay. Okay, that's a great question, and almost I wanted to potentially dovetail it off what Darren was saying as well with regard to listening, but let me just go to the theory. When someone's in a child ego state, they've been triggered. They've been put into that child ego state. They have lost contact with their adult. As I'm thinking contact with the adult, I'm thinking of Darren's the limbic structure and then to your prefrontal cortex. But what they've lost is the adult. And so they've lost their rationality. And what's happened is their rationality and logic has been hijacked by their emotions. And so when someone's in a child ego state, their emotions are driving their behavior. And if you want them to get back into an adult ego state, there has to be a chance for them to connect with those emotions and to release those emotions. And so if I come to you and I'm angry, telling me to calm down is probably the worst thing that you can do, because I'm not calm. Right now, I'm not calm. I'm in my rebellious child ego state. So what you need to do is you need to get me to unlock what those emotions are. And how you do that is a couple of things that have already been mentioned. One is make sure you're in your nurturing parent ego state. If you go back to that egogram that you gave me, all they would want to do is tell the person how irrational they're being or why they shouldn't be emotional, or this person is feeling emotional. And so your nurturing parent gets you to recognize that they are in a child ego state. Number two, ask some questions around those emotions. Why are they feeling like that? What happened? And what the person will do more often than not is they're going to share their story. And in sharing their story, what they're doing is they're releasing their emotions. And you've got to really listen to that story. Really listen, ask questions around things that they're saying. And what you'll find is that if you engage that process succinctly enough, and there's a couple of tips and tools that we follow, but once the person's released their emotion, more often than not, they've got access to their adult ego state again. And then when they're in the adult ego state, it's then that they can hear what it is that you need to tell them, whatever information it is. So if someone's in a child ego state, there's something that's put them there. And if you want to get them into another ego state, you've got to get them to release the child. They've got to talk about it.
I'm muted.
That means that you're not allowed to get triggered with their state, right? Because I like what you said. If someone is not calm, the last thing they want to hear is be calm. But if you're irritated by their state and you're triggered, then nothing's really going to come of that. So at some point in that situation, someone needs to be the adult. And hopefully, like Gandhi says, be the change that you want to see. Hopefully, let it start with you. If any of you have questions, please feel free to put your questions or comments in our chat box. And in the meantime, I want to ask our panel just a couple of tips that they do personally in their own lives during this time that we have coined the Corona Coaster at SyntroP Wellbeing. What are some of the things that you are doing personally in your life to stay sane? Dave, let's start with you.
I'll go. Oh, okay. Well, you go.
Yes.
The free child jumped right in there. Beat my free child. So right now I want to link it quite strongly to the subject matter that we've been going through. So just I think firstly it's good to have a sense of understanding of self. So if I go into my egogram, I'm very high in the adaptive child. I can get quite easily triggered in anxiety. I can get quite easily triggered in the fear. So this is very important, because if I'm not aware of this stuff, I can't double click on it if I'm not aware of it. So as Darren mentioned, so the anxieties are around every corner for me. And so what I do is when an anxiety arrives, there's two things that I really do. Number one is it does hit me. Of course it hits me, but when it starts to try and take control, I do two things for myself. Number one is I really try to go back to ego states and say, how would the adult manage this? Or how would a separate ego state manage this? Now, often it doesn't change the feelings, but what it does do is it allows me to think differently. When I'm stuck in my anxiety, my thinking is shut down. It allows me to think differently. The second thing I do is I do something creative for myself, because there's something about creativity for me, something that I enjoy, that allows me to step out of that particular world. And again, I can start to see things differently. The other thing is, again, to Darren and Cindy's point, both of their points, but I'm very lucky I have a great relationship. And I've got a relationship that's willing to receive me talking like this, that can receive it and hear it and not judge it, not try and solve it for me, not try and minimize it, does none of that. My relationship allows me to feel, to be vulnerable. So to what I've just mentioned, I speak, it's out, and I can see things a bit differently again.
Unmuted.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for sharing. Cindy, you can go ahead, free child.
Yeah, so I definitely do a lot of the free child things, which, I don't think I'll share those, but I'll share the nurturing parent ones with you. But